This is Hambledon Hill, near Shroton in Dorset. It's an ancient hill fort, a settlement dating back to around 2500 BC. There is archaeological evidence that there was some fighting here during that period, probably because it was on a tribal border. But there's one thing we can be sure of, and that's during the English Civil War, in August of 1645, there was a battle here. However, this wasn't a battle between Parliament and the King. This was a battle between Parliament and the Clubmen. This was a third party that was involved during the English Civil War, and they were made up of priests, artisans and peasants who had got together in a reaction to the Civil War. And this is their story. The Civil War had been raging from 1642. The world was changing, and the old ways of monarchy, a despotic king holding all the powers, could not be sustained. Parliament was struggling to even be able to meet under Charles I's rule, and objected against this and what it saw as unfair taxation to fight a war over religious doctrine with Scotland and corruption within the English Church. Charles was upset because he had been ordained by God and did not want to hand over powers to people that were not ordained by God and who had different ideas to him on church doctrine and political issues. However, disagreeing with the king was treason. Oliver Cromwell was an MP, and he had a commitment to the Puritan way of life, and therefore opposed any form of Catholic doctrine within the church. He rose through the ranks of the army, becoming Lord Protectorate in 1653. By the summer of 1645, it was not looking good for the king after losing the Battle of Naseby. For 4 years, Charles messed around causing trouble and unwilling to make any concessions to Parliament. It ended in Charles' execution on the 30th of January 1649, when Charles was tried for treason. In his defence, he kept asking, on whose authority? In Charles's mind, God was the only authority that could try him. So they cut off his head, and then I guess he could be tried by God. So how do the Clubmen fit into this story? During this period of time, there was no standing army, and troops were raised by local gentry and landowners. Men cost money, and it was up to them how much they paid. Inevitably, this would leave a huge gap, and to make up for this gap, men would steal from local farms, villages and towns. Along with very bad behaviour, this made them very unpopular with the locals. So people organised and collectively got together and called themselves the Clubmen. They called themselves the Clubmen because of the weapons that they held. Anything from old muskets to farm tools or to something they'd knocked up in their shed. Life was tough enough, with archaic taxes being levelled by Charles, along with substandard living and low wages, especially in rural areas. Always the possibility as well as having to shoot your brother, fall out with your mother and burn your neighbour's farm as they burn yours. Along with this, the possibility of being pressed into one army or the other. None of it was a pleasant outcome. So as you can imagine, insurrection was fairly common. The Western uprisings of 1626 and 1632 were still fresh in people's minds. The revolts against the Enclosures Acts, where common land rights for foraging and grazing were removed and the land was put into the hands of private ownership. Sounds familiar? The first Clubmen uprising was in Shropshire in December 1644. Over 1,200 men assembled to protest against the plundering by royalist garrisons. This soon spread to Dorset, The clubmen shot some royalist soldiers, then put a very well organised plan together. They set up a committee, decided on some resolutions which they embodied in a covenant here at Bradbury Rings. The covenant was read by Thomas Young, attorney at law, in front of 4,000 armed, angry men. He started by saying, "We, the miserable inhabitants of said counties," and then said the motto, "If you offer us plunder and to steal our cattle, be assured we will give you battle." Thomas Bravell appears to have been one of the most influential leaders of the Dorset Clubmen. He became rector of Compton Abbas in 1645 and had a hand in putting together the desires, resolutions and articles of covenant put to the clubmen at Bradbury Rings. He was also one of those who presented the petition to the king. The king agreed wholeheartedly, but of course he needed good publicity, although no decree was forthcoming. Understandable, considering his position at the time. Bravell, avoiding capture at Shaftesbury, was the leader of the clubmen on Hambledon Hill. On the 4th of August, Lieutenant General Oliver Cromwell, having received intelligence of some of the clubmen's places of rendezvous, left Sherborne with his 1,000 dragoons of the well-trained New Model Army. This was a serious situation for Cromwell. If the clubmen took sides and their numbers swelled, they could affect the outcome of the war. Their first port of call was Duncliffe Hill, a mile or two to the west of the town of Shaftesbury, where colours were being flown. However, swift negotiations with their spokesman Richard Newman of Fife Head seemed to resolve the situation. Cromwell assured them that Parliament did not want them to be plundered in any way, and that they could defend themselves from violence. They should bring to the New Model Army anyone who did any wrong, and the culprits would be punished severely. Around about 3,000 clubmen headed towards here, Hambledon Hill, behind me. Cromwell, with 1,000 dragoons, thundered towards Hambledon Hill in hoping to achieve the same result he had at Duncliffe Hill. The 1,000 dragoons of the highly trained New Model Army were met at the base of the hill by a lonely peasant carrying an old musket. He told them, "Here, what do you want? If you offer to plunder or steal our cattle, be assured we will bid you battle. Now bugger off, I got to go and wash my pig." The 1,000 dragoons of Cromwell's highly trained New Model Army were not happy with this peasant, and before he could fire his musket, they jumped on him and gave him a good kicking, but they didn't kill him. Cromwell sent 50 dragoons up to the top of the hill to negotiate with the clubmen. They were met with musket fire and had to retreat. This action by the clubmen upset the 1,000 well-trained dragoons of the New Model Army. However, a Mr. Lee of the clubmen managed to get out and do some negotiating personally with Cromwell. He went back to the clubmen and told them that Cromwell's intentions were peaceful and that they should lay down their weapons. However, this very reasonable offer from Cromwell was turned down, mainly due to the persuasiveness of two ministers that are described as vile. Cromwell then ordered Captain Gladman's troop to approach the clubmen and threaten to charge. Once again, they were met with a volley of musket fire. 2 dragoons and 4 horses were killed and 9 men were injured. the now 998 men of the well-trained dragoons of the new model army were more than angry. They were furious. By this time, Cromwell and his dragoons had had enough. They were informed of a back route to the top of Hambledon Hill, which they took immediately. When they reached the top, without hesitation, they charged the clubmen. Cromwell, in a letter describing the battle, said that a small execution was visited upon them. 12 were killed and many more were injured. The rest slid and tumbled down the hill to the hazard of their necks. This is St Mary's Church in Shrowton. It's a new church, but it's built on the original site of the old church. This tower is all that remains of the original church where the 300 prisoners were brought by Cromwell. Here he told them that they must go about their dutiful business and that they mustn't raise their arms against another Englishman, which is a little contradictory as we were in the middle of an English civil war. Cromwell himself gave the clubmen a good talking to, 300 of them that were squashed into this tiny church, hot and sweaty, distressed after seeing 50 of their friends slaughtered on top of Hambledon Hill. You've all been very naughty boys, and if you do it again, I'll hang you. Cromwell sent all but a few back to their farms and villages. In his report, he claimed that they promised to be dutiful for the time to come, and that they will be hanged before they come out again. The leaders, however, were retained for trial. Some of them managed to escape. 17 of them were imprisoned in Sherborne. As for the dead, they were buried in a long grave south of the old church tower. Most wars are about power, trade, religion and wealth, and the English Civil War was no exception. Parliament gained more powers from the monarchy, and this benefited business and trade. Yet for the ordinary folk, life was as hard and brutal as it had been prior to the war. Yet, what it showed was that if people organised, they had a voice that could not be ignored. This is the lesson of the clubmen.